I mean, before I go into that, I even went to Chick-fil-A. I went to Chick-fil-A and put an application in because at the time I was like, I just need some income. I mean, I don't care if I'm getting minimum wage. I just need some hours work to get some income to offset, our mortgage and to buy some groceries, to do something. The manager immediately comes to me and said, "Hey, do you have a few minutes? The owner's here and he wants to talk with you." I was like, "Absolutely. I'd be happy to talk with him." "Dustin, good to meet you." He said, to be honest with you, we don't get applications that look like this with people with the experience you have. Like, what is going on?" And so I told him. He said, "I appreciate your honesty." He said, "We're not going to be able to hire you." So I couldn't even get hired by Chick-fil-A during this season. God was just closing door after door after door. And me and Bethany were just sitting here like, what is going on? This is the Elevation Room, a space where we unpack life's hardest moments and the impact that they have on our faith, family, and fulfillment. I'm your host, Dustin Lale, and each episode we share real stories of resilience and breakthrough to inspire you to keep moving forward, rooted in your purpose, living on purpose, and walking with purpose. This journey we call life is not meant to be done alone. So click subscribe or the follow button now, settle in, and join us as we go into the Elevation Room. Welcome back to the Elevation Room. Today, we have a little bit different format. It's just me. No guest to interview this week, but I wanted to share some of my story and some of the lessons that God has taught me in this journey that we call life that I've been on thus far. A lot of times as we go through life, sometimes it seems like we're going around this mountain over and over again. I always like to look at the journey of life as, yes, going around a mountain, but every time we revisit a challenge that may feel familiar or experiencing something similar that we have in the past, hopefully we're a little bit higher up the mountain, a little bit closer to God, a little bit further along in our journey, matured a little bit, and have a different view and perspective on things so that we can approach the challenge in a little bit different way. So I hope you'll bear with me as we go on this journey today of what my story is up to this point and some of the lessons that I've learned through some of the challenging seasons as well. And, my first time talking into the camera and not to a guest. So appreciate your patience as we go through this together. So let's just start, as I always like to do, with where I'm at today. Me and Bethany have been married for 12 years as of May of this year, and we've got 3 wonderful children. We are truly blessed, and I'm so thankful for where we are today. There was something in my life in my 20s, early 20s, that when I would have a birthday, I would almost get a slight depression, is probably a good way to put it, saying, man, I know that God's called me to do so much, and I feel like I haven't even begun to make an impact. And, as I got married, and Bethany would help encourage me through those seasons. And I can truly say that today, as birthdays come and go, and as we continue on this path, I'm so thankful for what God has done from the past that I used to be in and the things that we've gone through and journeyed through. And to be where we are today, not where everything is solved and all the problems are gone, far from it. We are currently in a season right now that feels very similar to some of what I'm going to share with you today on the podcast. And so I thought, being in the season I'm in, feeling like, hey, God, what direction do you want me to go? I thought it would be appropriate to revisit a similar season in my life when we were asking the very same question, seeking direction from God, trying to understand, God, what are you saying? And what do you want us to do? And asking the whys and the hows and the whats and all those kinds of questions. So as we begin this conversation, I want to go back to college. I started my college career going to school for industrial engineering. What I liked about that was it was a very good mix of technical expertise. I loved math and science my whole life, and knew I was going to go into some form of discipline that had to do with engineering. It was just a matter of, hey, which discipline? Was it engineering for mechanical engineering, civil engineering, chemical, etc.? So I landed on industrial engineering because it was that mix of technical expertise with the mix of people and integrating systems and processes as well as dealing with people. I always enjoyed working with people, working on teams, collaborating with folks. Um, though I recharge as an introvert, I do enjoy and need that people collaboration. And so I thought, hey, industrial engineering is a great fit, great mix of the two. And so went through college, did a couple of internships, and through that, as I interned with a contractor that worked with NASA, and then I did an oil and gas internship. Through that experience, I said, "Hey, I really enjoy the NASA side of things. I think I'm going to go that route." And I absolutely despise the oil and gas side of things. So I said I'd never work in oil and gas. In fact, after my internship with the company that I was with for the oil and gas internship, they offered me a job and I declined it. Going into my senior year, I said, "No, thank you. I'm not interested in this industry. I'm focusing more on the NASA route." And so through that, my senior year of college, I began the application process for full-time employment and was working through all the steps to work at NASA full-time. And I was also applying for other defense contractors as well. And got to my last semester, was working through the process on NASA and made it through all the steps that were required, and then made it to the final step. It was the hiring manager, and there were 32 job openings throughout the country. At the time, I didn't really matter where I was going to be located. I was ready to go, and got an email that said, "Hey, due to the federal government cutting the budget to NASA, this job and all of these jobs are off the market." I said, "Okay, well, that's where I thought I was heading. Don't want to be in the oil field. So, what are my options?" At this point, I was a baby Christian. Had just given my life to the Lord. Just started trying to live for Christ. And so that last semester, I had taken an architecture class because it was an elective I needed an elective, and that was a class I selected for it. Kind of an easy A approach. But I really enjoyed it. I love, again, the mathematics behind architecture, all the skill, but also paired with a little bit of creative. And so I said, "Hey, let's see if I can get into architecture school." Talked to some advisors. The school I went to, LSU, they had a really great architecture program. I was told I needed to, take the entrance exam, get a certain grade, and apply. And because of how late it was in the school year, the chances were nearly impossible. So I said, "Okay." Went, took the test, got the grades, got all of the references that I needed, put everything together, and submitted my application for the School of Architecture. And then, wouldn't you know, as I thought it would be a miraculous acceptance, as it wasn't expected. Everyone told me it couldn't happen, and I was like, "Wow, Lord, this is a miracle. You made a way when I was told it was near impossible to get in at this point in the game." So I was excited. Said, "Hey, I'm going to go into architecture school, and this is going to be the path that I'm going to move in going forward." Again, it wasn't something I had thought about it before, but the timing of it, my last semester, that class said, "Hey, this is the direction I'm going to go." And then about the same time, I got reached out to by the gentleman I had worked under during the previous summer in his internship with a company. I said, "No, thank you." It's a multinational company. I turned down the job they offered me, but he reached out to me. He had gotten a promotion to Houston, Texas in a new position. He said, "Dustin, we have this job that I think would fit you really well based on, the work you did for us over the summer, your degree. I think you'd be a good fit. So I looked at it and I was like, first of all, I wasn't interested in going into this industry. I just got accepted into architecture school, and that was the direction I was heading. And so I said, look, I appreciate the offer. Let me take a few days to think about it. And so what I did was I took 3 days to go to a campground to just pray and fast and ask God, hey, what direction do you want me to go? The job that he was offering now was actually paid less than the initial job they had offered me after my summer internship. But after praying through everything, the two options of architecture school and this other direction, God told me to accept this position as a Lean Six Sigma black belt focused around process improvement, really tied into my industrial engineering degree with systems processes, improving those processes, working with people. And so even though it was less of a offer than they had made me before, I felt God saying that was the direction to go. And so I did. And through that experience, looking back now, I guess almost it's been 14 years since we've done that, since I made that decision. I can see God working through it all. And what's interesting about it is even though I'd said I would never work in the oil and gas field, after seeking God's face, that's where he had me. And moving me out of Baton Rouge and into Houston by myself. I didn't have any family there, didn't have any friends. You had to find a new church group to plug into. Through that process, it allowed me to really grow in my relationship with Jesus. As I traveled the world, as I went all around the country to different plants and different projects and working on different things, I would bring my Bible, my concordance, my journal, and that was it. Books to read. Most of the time when I was traveling overseas for an extended period of time, I would have a 100-pound suitcase, and probably 60 pounds of that were books, and the rest were clothes and things that I needed for my time there. But through that process, I really got to grow in my relationship with the Lord, and I can't say that I enjoyed every aspect of it. I really enjoyed the travel. I enjoyed getting to know the people. But I really didn't enjoy being in a cubicle day in and day out. That wasn't uh, exciting for me. It was draining in a lot of ways. But after a couple of years of doing that job, I got promoted and took on a managerial role. So I had a team of people working for me now, and I got to move into a new office space that wasn't a cubicle base, but actual offices that I was working in and my team was working in. And so I got to develop those relationships and pour into people, and really had a great experience through that. Got to grow a department, got to earn new contracts, and really started to, for the first time, experience some uh, of the sales piece of work that I hadn't experienced before. Because the first role, I was process improvement focused. Hey, come in, make improvements, solve some problems, put controls in place, and then walk away. And now I was having to build relationships with clients and earn new contracts and keep work for our team, grow our department, develop the people. And through that process, I remember one particular moment that, if I could go back, I feel like I would do it over again. But, through this, God really showed me that relationships make such a huge difference. And there was one moment when we had a opening for a project manager, and the way our team was set up, we had a project manager and a project coordinator that managed, certain client contracts. And we had one of our project coordinators that had worked with us for a couple of years. He was doing great work, and we had a new project manager we are hiring, and he, of course, applied for it, and that was part of the application process. And I had hundreds of resumes from, outside people that, people who were outside of the company that were applying for the job. And I'm sure anyone who's been in a hiring manager's position can understand that can be very overwhelming. So went through, filtered as best as we could, interviewed several candidates. And at the end of the day, we decided to go with someone who on paper had the right experience, it seemed. He was a little bit older gentleman, had a great resume, interviewed well. And so we chose to go that route rather than promoting the project coordinator. And I remember almost immediately afterwards that I regretted that decision. And unfortunately, that gentleman didn't perform very well. Whereas I know or feel like the guy that was a project coordinator, his name was Raymond, he's still working for the company today. He would have done such a phenomenal job because if we would have placed our bets on him, he was the kind of guy that was working hard for his family. He was out to prove that he was capable. And I remember that, and that has stuck with me as just a lesson, throughout my life that, when you've got relationships with people and they are giving their all and they are investing in you and the culture you're building and the direction you're going and the vision that you're going, if you place a bigger bet on them, I just feel like, and as I've talked to other people who have been in management and leadership positions, that those people are going to be the best people to continue to invest in rather than trying to bring someone in from the outside that is, seems to have all the right things on paper, but you're not quite sure if they're going to be a culture fit. That's just something that stuck with me ever since that moment. And, I've been involved in other things and have continued to reach out to him while we were still in Texas. And, from that point forward, I felt like I had almost lost a little bit of trust with him. And, nothing just worked out. And, he's still doing really well where he's at today. And I'm so happy for him. But that's a lesson that I learned through that season that's just stuck with me that I haven't been able to shake. And so, I don't know if any of you listening or watching are in a similar position where you might be interviewing people or considering taking a chance on someone who's been with you for a while. And I would say emphatically yes. If they've shown that they've got great work ethic, if they've bought into the vision and are driving in the same direction you're driving, if you place a bigger bet on them, man, I just feel like they are going to do a phenomenal job for you. So anyway, take that for what it's worth. But I just remember that lesson and wanted to share it with you because it's something that's just continued to stick with me even today. So as we were going on this journey, I've been with the company for about 4.5 years, and I was at church one day, my wife and I, and we were just in a worship set, and I felt like God was telling me to go ask a gentleman that was there at the church if he was looking for a business partner. In my heart, I'd always wanted to be an entrepreneur. We started some side hustles along the way, done and tried different little things. Just always had that interest in entrepreneurship. And so there were two guys that had businesses, and we had started a little t-shirt company on the side, and one of the guys had a t-shirt printing company. And I was like, God, are you sure it's not this guy? And God said, no, not him. Go ask this guy he was in an educational products company. That's what he had built. I said, okay. So I went talk to him, had the conversation. He said, Dustin, it's interesting that you bring this up. He said, I have been considering partnering with somebody. I'm looking to train someone up, and I think he was in his early 60s at the time. So he was looking to train someone up that he could hand the business over to, and then he could, more or less retire as the business continued to grow, and he could, advise and still benefit from the company growing, but really hand off the day-to-day operations to someone else. So I said, great. My wife and I, this was a 6-month process of just praying through it, seeking God's face, having conversations, because at this time we were, maybe 25 years old, 26 years old. We were making really good money. I was moved into middle management, being groomed into executive management. It worked as a team, all these kind of things, had people reporting to me, just wonderful experiences that I'm thankful for at a young age. And we were praying and asking God to leave this job that was great pay, salary, benefits, all of that. My wife was still in physical therapy school. We were paying for it as we went, and felt like God was telling us to move into to partner with this guy where our pay would go to zero. It was a commissions only job selling these products, no benefits, no retirement, none of the things that you look for whenever you're looking to make a job change. And, we were told that we were crazy. I remember having conversations with my family, love my family, close with my family. My dad just being like, dude, you're crazy. You shouldn't do this. You can't do this. And I remember one moment, my dad was just trying to get it through. Like I was, in his eyes, just not hearing what he was saying. And I was like, Dad, I hear you. You are right. There are 10,000 reasons why we shouldn't make this change. I said, but there is one reason why we should, and God's told us to make this change. And so at that point, after 6 months of praying, and, we felt God was telling us to get out of the boat, to walk on water, as Peter, when he said, Jesus, is this you? And he said, come. And so Peter got out of the boat and he walked on water towards Jesus. And that's what we felt like God was telling us to, hey, come join me. Step out of the boat of comfort, of where you're at with a salary, a paycheck coming every other week. You saying, I'm faithful. You believing I'm faithful. Come, step out on the water. And so we did. And we look back on that, and that was a very difficult season. We went, as I started getting involved with the business, at the time it was the guy who owned it, who was the sales guy, and then we had an office manager who, was paid an hourly wage, and that was pretty much it. Helpers here and there that would come in part-time to fill big orders. But as I started getting involved, my background of process improvement really started to kick in. And I said, hey, we can optimize the process here. We can trim costs here. So I started working on the office side of things. But got to remember, this is a commission-only sales job. And so I wasn't getting paid for sitting and fixing things in the office. And so I'd go on sales calls. The guy who owned it was teaching me, the business, teaching me the industry, introducing me to clients and prospects, and really teaching me the sales side of things. But I was spending a lot of time in the office, fixing the processes, improving the processes, trying to increase profitability. And, that excitement of, hey, this could one day be mine, because the conversation we were having was, hey, in 12 to 18 months, we can make you vice president and start handing over control of the company to you if things go as planned. And then he was going to start taking a step back. And so the thought of, hey, this could be mine one day really started building that excitement. And so I wanted, things as optimized as possible, as streamlined as possible, implementing new systems, new processes, new software. And so there would be some days I'd be working all through the night and then go home late at night, say, hey, this is what I was working on. This is what I was doing. Even though it was a lot of work, it was energizing. It was exciting. But, after a few months, checks weren't coming in like we had thought. Sales were much slower than anticipated. And because I was spending so much time in the office, I wasn't spending as much time knocking on doors. And I think in that first year, we might have made $20,000, $25,000. And that was tough. That was really challenging for us whenever, we're saying, God, you told us to make this transition. And at the time, we thought if God is telling us to do it, then he's going to bless it, right? We're being obedient. He's going to be in it. Like, this is going to prosper financially, and the sky's the limit. And that wasn't our experience in this situation. It was very tough. I remember there were so many conversations, with my mother-in-law, with, people that were mentors to me. And we were like, I just don't understand what's going on. I feel like God is faithful. Like I could say that. And in my heart, I felt like I believed that. But we were struggling. We'd gone through our savings. As we gotten through and deeper into the business, there were some financial things that we had uncovered that we didn't think were ethical. Had those conversations with the owner, and he pushed back, wasn't wasn't willing to make changes. And then we rearranged payment terms because, hey, I'm spending all this time in the office fixing things and improving sales for you, but I'm not getting paid. And so we had agreed on a tiny commission split on what were house accounts in order to help compensate some of that because, some big orders were coming in. I'd spend, days and days, if not weeks, working on these while I'm not out selling for myself. And so we started going through this process, and there came a time after about a year that we just felt like the things that we had agreed upon weren't coming to fruition, that what we were told by the owner, he wasn't honoring. And it was just a confusing, challenging time for us because, like, man, this guy's he's an elder at the church, but we feel like there are some things he's doing that are unethical. He's not doing what he said he was going to do. Feel like he's taking advantage of certain things. And, we were young and I mean, like, early 20s and just kind of confused of, God, what is going on here? And I remember it got to a point where I was just so upset with God that Bethany and I were leaving church one Sunday, and she looked at me and she's like, babe, what is wrong? Like, I can tell something is just absolutely wrong. And of course, she knew all that was going on at work. And I said, I don't understand how we can say God is faithful when look at all that we're going through. We did what he told us to do, and look at the situation we're in. We've got no money left. We've gone through all of our savings. I had earned stock options at the previous company that I was in. We had to sell all of those stock options. We'd gone through that. We had to end up taking a student loan out for Bethany to finish graduate school, which and before that, we were just paying as we went. We had no money in the bank. There were 2 times that God told us to give an offering, when we were at church, that God told us to write the last little bit in our checking account. And so we were at zero twice, 2 separate times. And he was faithful in that, I was like, hey, I don't know how we're going to get gas money. But, through that process, he showed up time and time again. But in that moment, I remember specifically, I said, I don't believe God is faithful in my heart anymore. I will not say and cannot say God is faithful because I don't believe it. And it wasn't but a few minutes later that we got a text from the pastor of the church at the time saying, hey, Dustin, would you be willing to do the offering message on Wednesday at this upcoming Wednesday service for us? And it was in that moment that I looked at Bethany and I just laughed out of disgust, out of disbelief, out of, are you kidding me? But at the same time, recognizing that God was speaking to us, that he was saying, hey, I see where you're at, but I haven't forgotten you. It was in that moment, it was almost so comical I was sitting here complaining and how I wasn't believing that God was faithful. And God was almost laughing like, finally, you're at the point that I've been waiting for you to get to really, in your heart of hearts, uncover something that otherwise I would have never known was there. Because whenever we're getting a check every other week, it's easy to say, God, you're faithful. When you know how much money is coming, when you're tithing and you're getting raises that match exactly God would challenge me and say, hey, give more. I would give more, and then God would give me a raise to match exactly what we had upped our giving to. That happened 3 separate times while we were on a salary. And so it was easy for me to say God is faithful whenever the income was there regularly. We could count on it. And it was almost as if our trust was in that paycheck rather than actually being in God. And so it was in that moment that that realization of all of that came to like, hey, maybe this season wasn't for financial prosperity as we thought per se, or maybe it wasn't and hasn't looked like we thought, but maybe it was something deeper that God was working on me and through us in this hour. And so I remember telling Bethany, like, this is crazy. I'm still mad. I still can't, I'm not going to go up there and preach a message as short as, an offering message is on God being faithful. I'm angry at what the situation is. I'm angry at this guy for essentially lying to me. And so I said, I'm not going to go up and be a hypocrite or share something I don't believe. So that Wednesday, my message was, hey, if you have anything against your brother, leave your offering right there, go make things right, and then come back and give it. And so anyway, the pastor at the time asked us to do the offering, 2 services in a row. And it was in that moment that, things didn't change from a circumstance perspective. But I allowed God to start doing a work in my heart that otherwise I don't think could have been possible if it wasn't for that situation where we had given all of our money. We had lost all of our money. A couple of times God told us to write checks. We'd given it away. People were buying groceries for us. There was families at church that after church, we didn't tell anybody the situation and circumstance that we're in. One, because, the guy was an elder at the church. We didn't feel like it was right. Two, we didn't want any pity, really. We just felt like God told us to do this, and so we're going to trust in God. And we were learning what that actually looked like, what authentic trust in God looked like. And I remember, man, some mornings just being so difficult, so challenging, crying out to God, Lord, I don't know what else to do. And then dealing with what felt like a betrayal of this guy saying, hey, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, or I'm going to pay you this and pay you that, and then him not, and me having to fight for it. Even after about a year when we renegotiated commissions on house accounts, a big order comes in and I spend weeks working on it. And then on my commission check, I add in, this 5% commission that we had agreed upon, and him just blowing up like, what is this? Why am I paying you for this? And just being baffled at like, what is going on here? And things getting to a point where 6 months later, I'd been there about 18 months. The level of things that we had uncovered, how we were being treated, the unethical items we had discovered, I didn't even want my name tied to the organization any longer. That just felt like it was time for us to walk away. And so we did. I didn't have another job lined up. We felt like God released us. And so we walked away. And of course, immediately began applying for other jobs. And as God would have it, no one accepting not even an interview. It was crazy. For 6 more months after we walked away, nothing. And, we had already come to the end of ourselves from a financial standpoint. I mean, we didn't have anything. Thankfully, we had our house, but we didn't have any money at all. It was bananas. And we were so thankful for, family members who would buy us groceries. We were still very involved with the church. And, again, we weren't sharing with a lot of people. Certain people knew, obviously, after that we were confiding in, just getting prayer from. But, man, that was a challenging season. But through that season, God, again, showed us his faithfulness. And it's something that we're so thankful for today because we've been able to share with many other people who are going through challenging times financially the lessons that we learned of, hey, what are we actually putting our trust in? Is it the job that we have? Is it the paycheck that we're getting? Or is it truly Jehovah Jireh, our God who provides on the mountaintop, the God who provides? And so that lesson is one that we're so thankful for, that we learned through so much through that season about his faithfulness, about leaning into him, about trusting him every step of the way. And then now looking back through that process, as I was applying to, company after company after company, getting no interviews, no interviews, no interviews, a company reached out. I don't know, probably 5 months into it of me not having a job. Before I go into that, I even went to Chick-fil-A. Okay, and Hobby Lobby. I went to Chick-fil-A and put an application in because at the time I was like, I just need some income. I don't care if I'm getting minimum wage. I just need some hours work to get some income to offset, our mortgage and to buy some groceries, to do something. I went to Chick-fil-A, submitted my resume. The manager immediately comes to me and said, "Hey, do you have a few minutes? The owner's here and he wants to talk with you." I was like, "Absolutely. I'd be happy to talk with him." The owner comes out of the Chick-fil-A, the owner operator, and he brings his COO because this particular owner had multiple Chick-fil-A's, which isn't normal. They both sit down with me and they're looking at my application. They said, "Dustin, good to meet you." He said, to be honest with you, we don't get applications that look like this with people with the experience you have. Like, what is going on? And so I told them, said, "Hey, this is what happened. I had a great job, moved to another company. It hasn't worked out." I said, "I've always wanted to or considered owning a Chick-fil-A one day because, again, this entrepreneur side of me was like, hey, it'd be great to own a Chick-fil-A." Loved Chick-fil-A at the time. And I said, what better way to really learn the business than by working in it? I said, I just, I'm not asking for any special treatment or any management role. I just want to work the front lines, just get a little bit of income coming in. He said, "Well, Dustin," he said, "really, I appreciate you applying." He said, "But whenever we hire someone, we really want someone who we can train, who will be with us for a while, so that we try and minimize the turnover as much as possible, as much as we can control it." He said, "So I just have to ask, if you were to get a job opportunity that's more in line with your field, say next week, would you take it or would you want to stay with us?" I said, "Well, sir, I appreciate you asking, but I've got to be honest with you. If a job opportunity comes in the field that I'm in, then I most certainly will have to take that, and continue my career down that path." He said, "Well," he said, "I appreciate your honesty." He said, "But because of that, and it kind of goes against our hiring practices, we're not going to be able to hire you." I said, "Thank you. I appreciate your honesty and transparency." So I couldn't even get hired by Chick-fil-A during this season. God was just closing door after door after door. And me and Bethany were just sitting here like, what is going on? We couldn't believe it. And so about 5 months into this job-seeking journey, I actually had a recruiter reach out to me of a company I hadn't applied for, and got an interview. It was a payroll company in the human capital management space. Never been in that space, but I had got my introduction into sales through the educational products company. So they had me in, they interviewed me, went through the process, got the job, and it was a blessing because in that moment we started working in January, and it had been about 2 years since we had made the transition from leaving the first company, and so, man, we were so thankful. It was a breath of fresh air to have a salary coming in. In the season we had learned of God's faithfulness, and so it was nice to thank you, Lord, for steady income. My wife was in her final year of PT school, so we had that, and we were able to just take a breath, to kind of lean in to that season of learning the new job, getting formal training through a company that's known for its sales training, and really just start to unpack that season. And so to fast forward a little bit, as we went through that, we spent about a year in that role. And we got in that time, my wife was finishing school, so we started our family. The January that our first child was born, we were looking for nannies and daycares and going through that whole process. Wife was graduating. Um, when she was born, well, I'm sorry, my wife had graduated the year before. Then she started working full time. Then we started our family. And so, whenever my daughter was born, we were going through this process of, God, where do you want us to put her? We don't want we would like someone that we can trust. We'd like the idea of a nanny. And at the time, after a couple of months, my mother-in-law was coming in every week to help while my wife went back to work, and we were trying to find out this daycare and nanny situation, and just door after door after door kept closing. And it got to a point where I remember one time we'd come back to Louisiana to visit, and we were driving home, and my eyes just started tearing up. And Bethany looked at me. She said, "Babe, what's going on?" And I said, "I feel like God is calling us back to Louisiana." And why that was such a big deal is we loved it in Houston, Texas. We absolutely loved it. In fact, I had said I would never move back to Louisiana. Word to the wise, don't use the word never when it comes to things that you're doing and putting God in a box, because I had said I'd never work in the oil and gas field, and that's where God called me. I'd never move back to Louisiana. And at that moment, we felt God was telling us to move back to Louisiana. And so whenever, Evangeline was born, we went went a few months just door after door closing. And then I said, "Hey, I think the time is now for us to move back. God has closed these doors, and the time is now." And so I talked to my boss at the time, and he had a position open in the state of Louisiana. It was the territory he covered. And he said, "Dustin, I think this transition could work out really well. I was looking for someone in Louisiana to cover that entire state. I'd love for it to be you." And, we had a great relationship together. And so through that, about 6 months after my daughter was born, we made the move back to Louisiana. And the job that I had, that God had orchestrated, we were able to just transition nicely, with no new job for me, no disruption in pay. Was able to just take over a new territory over the state of Louisiana. We got to move back in with family. And looking back over that season, really started learning sales, obviously, before I had left my previous company that I was salaried at. Got to learn it at a whole different level with the educational products company. Then as we moved out of that, God orchestrated that recruiter to reach out to us at the right time to get into a job that I could work in for a couple of years, learn the industry, learn what I needed to learn selling that product, and then transition very nicely over the state of Louisiana, selling the same product I was selling at the time, but moving closer to family into a state we said we would never go back. And so it's interesting that through this whole process, the relationships, I keep coming back to relationships, because even though the season in the educational products company was tough, it was a relationship that allowed that opportunity to open. And it was God telling us to move into that season. And God showed us a whole lot. We learned a whole lot through that season. And then it was through relationship that whenever God was calling us back to Louisiana, it was a relationship with the manager that allowed us, on physically to make that transition very seamlessly. And it was something that I was just so thankful for. Again, going back, looking over the life that I've lived so far, relationships have been such a key component. And I'm so grateful for that. My dad used to always say, "It's not what you know, it's who you know." And of course, at the time, young, thought I knew everything, too prideful, too arrogant for my own good. I used to roll my eyes a bit and ignore that. But he was so right. I mean, who we know and the relationships that you build carry so much weight, and can make such a huge impact on your life. And so, anyway, I want to fast forward a little bit of the story, because we're in a season now where, looking back at the relationships, after I worked for the company was ADP, I followed the manager to another company that eventually got bought up by private equity. And it was a relationship another relationship that I had made during my time at ADP. He had called me when I had just moved to this other company, following the manager. He said, "Hey, Dustin, we're looking for someone in Lafayette. Are you interested?" And I said, "Look, I just followed my boss to this new company. I'm not interested. I appreciate it. Thank you, but no thank you." Well, a year later, he followed up with me and said, "Hey, Dustin, we're still looking. I don't know if things have changed." And at this time, the company we had moved to had just been bought out by private equity. And there were some things and changes coming down the pipe that I said, "You know what? I think now's a good time." And so it was through that relationship that we made, said, "Hey, let's look at this other opportunity." And we made the transition. And since then, the company I work for now, I've made so many relationships that I'm thankful for. And God has worked so many things out through those relationships, like this podcast studio, right? This came from a relationship that I made through the CPA that we use, that I met from a financial advisor that I was meeting with through the company I work for now, connected the dots, put me in touch with this guy. We built a relationship over the last, 18 months or so. And whenever I was looking for a space to build this out, I called him up. I said, "Hey, this is what God's put in my heart. I feel like you could use it anytime you need, and I need the space. Are you willing and able?" He said, "Absolutely, Dustin. I'm more than happy to let you use this space in order to do the podcast studio." And so, through relationships, God has just connected the dots time and time again. And the Bible tells us that we're to build our life on a strong foundation, a firm foundation, not one built on sand, but a firm foundation. And so, when I was thinking about that, and really trying to wrap a bow on some of the lessons that we've learned, thinking about going back to what I mentioned at the beginning of the episode of this mountaintop, this mountain experience, this journey of life, that as we go around, similar challenges may come up. We are in a season now where we're just faced with a couple of different options that we're like, "God, what are you saying to us? What direction are you wanting us to go?" It seems like door after door is closing. What door are you opening up? Which is a very similar experience that we had whenever we made the transition to the educational products company. Again, different circumstances, but a similar experience where, a few weeks ago, I was sitting at an industry of faith luncheon where it's just a bunch of Christian minded business people coming together to sit under a message. And the gentleman preached on Peter getting out of the boat and walking on water. Again, in the midst of Bethany and I asking God, what are you saying in this season where it seems like certain doors are closing and a couple of other doors are opening? What direction are you wanting us to go? I've talked to several mentors, several friends, and they're telling me, "Dustin, there's several people who are in a similar situation where they're faced with these circumstances where there is nothing they can do, and there are no other options for them to take unless God moves." And of all of that, I think of, what lessons did I learn in this season when we moved to this educational products company? God, don't help me to not have to relearn these. Let me look at that season, glean what it was that you taught us, and to lean into that now. And so I want to share with you this, thinking about our lives being built on a firm foundation. Of course, that foundation is Christ. And when I think of a strong foundation and just something that is solid, I think of a fort. And so, of course, I came up with this acronym for FORT, looking at the lessons that God has taught me in some of these challenging seasons. And I want to start with F, being faithful. God is faithful through it all. Even in the challenging times, even in these difficult seasons that we hear about, in the elevation room and we have conversations over coffee with our friends and other people that are close in our lives, God is faithful. The Bible tells us that we are to ask and it will be given to us. Seek and we will find. Knock and the door will be open. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, the door will be open. That's in Matthew chapter 7. And so when we meditate on that, when we think about that, you've heard on the episode with Cole Lusby, he said when he was in a challenging season, when he was in a transition season, he started meditating on the sovereignty of God. And when we look in the book of Matthew and Jesus is saying, hey, ask and you will be given. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open. We can know that, look, God's ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. God's plan for us is to give us good things, not to harm us, but to give us good things so that we prosper. And so prospering, we might have an idea of what that looks like in our lives and what we want that to be in our lives. And God has sometimes a different definition of prospering, just like in that difficult season of the educational products company, right? I thought prospering was going to be that of financial prosperity, of, hey, God, you told us to do this. We're going to go, you're going to breathe life on this, and we're going to blow this company up, and it's going to do amazing things. And that was not the case. Prospering was that my soul would learn how to prosper in a season of difficulty, to lean into Him, to trust in God, to understand that God truly is faithful. That was the kind of prosperity I needed in that season to help prepare me for the things to come in the future. So F is God is faithful. The O is obedience, because the Bible tells us that obedience is better than sacrifice. God is creating a story in our lives that is so much bigger than what we could ever ask, think, or imagine. And oftentimes involves, or I'd say oftentimes, always involves more people than just us. So often when we're setting goals, when we're setting vision, when we're saying, hey, these are the things I want to do in my life, at least for me, in the past, it could be very self-focused. Of course, it's through the filter of, God, I want to do what you want me to do. I want to make sure I'm obedient to you. But it's still about, hey, what can we do for the family, for my life, for our lives, etc. But our story is not that of a soloist. Our story is intertwined with all of those around us. I heard a gentleman share with me of a company that he had started that he knew God told him to start. And he began this company and he invested a lot of money into it. They had some success, but in the end, he lost $300,000 in that venture. And he said, God, I don't understand what is going on. You told me to start this company. I listened. I obeyed. Why am I losing so much money? And then God spoke to him and said, hey, do you remember that person that you hired, that woman that you hired? He said, yes, Lord, I remember her. He said, do you remember when y'all went? It was an import-export company, so I believe they went to another country. He said, do you remember when y'all went to that country? He said, yes. That lady met her husband in that country. And now that couple has a family, and as a family, they are doing missions all around the world. He said, that was why I had you start that company. So she could meet her husband, they could have a family and do my work around the world. He said, okay, Lord, I'll never ask again. He understood in that moment that even though he may have experienced some material loss, that wasn't the purpose of that company. The purpose of that company, as God had showed him, was for that woman to meet her husband so that they could start a family and continue doing work that God had ordained before either of them had been born. And so it's things like that that we often don't get a glimpse to, or often don't even understand that is happening around our lives, that God may be using us in the life of someone else to accomplish something for someone else. And so for us, the most important thing is to be obedient to what He is telling us to do, which leads to the R, relationships. As I just mentioned in that previous story, it was the relationships that were formed through that company that was the reason for that company to come into existence, that God put it on his heart to start that company, was that he could build a relationship with this person so that she could meet her husband, and so on and so forth. And so I think back at, we have some real estate investments, and we're in a season right now where we're trying to sell some properties at the worst time you could possibly sell them, and we're probably going to lose some money in them. But when we're looking back and asking God, hey, we know that you told us to do this. Why are we experiencing this perceived loss? And he brings to our attention the relationships that have been formed with the business partner, with Matt Ackman, who was on the episode #1, and his wife Mariah and their kids, and the bonds that have been built through with our families together, the ministry that we've been able to do through our trips as we're setting up these properties, as we were visiting these properties, and sharing the good news of Jesus, where our realtor even came to us last year on a phone call. I was talking with him about some things, and he said, Dustin, he said, I want you to know the example that you and Matt set before me. He said, I've recommitted my life back to Jesus. I'm bringing my family back to church. We're praying together as a family every night now with my kids, and I just want to thank you for that. And it just blew us away. Like, God, if it was only for that, we're so grateful. If it was only for those moments, the relationships that we've built, the opportunity to share the love of Jesus to people that we would have otherwise never met, it was all worth it. And so when I think about God's faithfulness, when I think about being obedient, when I think about the relationships that come through all of that, the T in F.O.R.T, as we're building upon this firm foundation, is trust. My favorite verse is Proverbs 3, verse 5-6. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding, but in all of your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. In everything that we're doing, it's easier to be obedient when you trust him. It's easy to, or easier, I'll say, because it's not always easy, but it is easier to know that, hey, when God says, hey, you being evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more so your Father in heaven, who is good, how much more so will he not withhold from you, his children? The Father in heaven knows how to give good gifts. And if we can learn to truly trust him in all that we do, in the relationships that he's brought into our lives, knowing that we can be obedient to what he's telling us and that he is faithful to bring about the finished work that he is trying to orchestrate, not just in our lives, but those around us. The stressors that usually or may keep you up at night, the worry, the anxiety that may plague you can all fade away, knowing that we can cast our burdens upon him, that he is faithful, that we can trust him, and all we have to do, all he's asking for, is our yes. So as we think about building our lives on this firm foundation of Christ, building up this fort that I just picture in my mind being built, this firm foundation with this massive fort on it that can't be shaken. God is faithful. If we can be obedient, the relationships that are in our lives and trusting in God, he's faithful, be obedient, relationships, and trust him, then I think we will be in a much better place. And I'm speaking that over my own life right now as we're navigating a season, asking God, what direction are you wanting us to go? What are we leaning into? But I know that he is faithful. I just want to obey him. I want to nurture the relationships that he's put into my life, look for new ones that he's calling me to, and just trust him with all of my heart. I can't ask for any more than that. I can live a life of gratitude, abiding in him, leaning on those principles. And so I hope that blesses you. I guess going through this as we wind down a solo episode can move into the ABCs of the elevation room, because the advice I would give to myself would be exactly this: the fort, right? That God is faithful, right? Dustin, just lean in and obey what he's telling you to do. Don't stress about the things that seem so big in the moment. But with time, I can look back and say, they're just small things. Lean into those moments, really lean into the relationships of the people that God's placed in our lives, and don't be afraid to make new ones. Something where I'm at today that I'm so thankful for, it's forced me out of my comfort zone into networking more, into meeting new people, and to exploring new opportunities with relationships with others that otherwise, if I would just have chosen to stay reserved in my own little box, in my own little bubble, opportunities wouldn't be there. And so to really nurture those relationships, to love on people, to allow people to love on me, to speak life into people, to allow people to speak life into me, and know that through it all, I can trust him because he's faithful. I can trust him because he is a good God, a loving God. And that would be the advice that I would give to myself, is those tenets. Some books that have had a big impact on me thus far. Obviously, the Bible, of course, second to none. But I would say, on top of that, some good books that I've read is Atomic Habits. That is great. Again, kind of goes into my back to my systems and processes background of habit stacking and just getting 1% better. I always like to challenge myself. I often find if I don't have something I'm shooting for, then it's hard for me to be disciplined, which is something I'm working on. But it took me signing up for an Ironman last year and completing one to have the discipline of exercising cardiovascularly for the previous 2 years. It took me having a tangible goal to achieve towards that. So the book Atomic Habits was really great. And another book that has helped me from a mindset position of really zoning in on, hey, what is the purpose and what is something that you think you were created for, is the book Limitless by Jim Quick. It's a secular book, but the principles in it are very biblical because, as we know, anything that's true and good is going to be found and based on biblical principles anyway. But those two books have been really good, and I'm thankful for having read those books. A third one I'll say is Go Big by Mo Bunnell. He did it's a book on value selling. And it's not the value selling as I talked about with Tommy on this podcast, but it's truly going about just adding value to people all around you. And that is something over the last year that I've really tried to be very intentional with, is just adding and bringing value, not expecting anything in return, essentially sowing good seed and letting that fruit grow as it may. I can't control the results. Those are in God's hands, but I can control the inputs and I can control my responses to things. And so adding value is a focus that I've placed on all the relationships that I've been building and working towards building since I've read that book. So I'm very thankful for that. The last one, cherish family traditions. I love and really cherish having dinner together as a family. When I was exploring probably about a year ago with Bethany of, hey, why does this mean so much to me? I think back to whenever I was young. My dad used to work nights, and so the time that we had together as a family was at dinner time, because often he would be waking up, getting ready for work as my mom would be coming home from work. And so we'd start preparing dinner. My mom would start cooking while he was getting ready, or she'd bring food home. And then we would sit together as a family around the table and share the meal. And that was it. After we would eat, he would head off to work, and then we would go about the rest of our evening. And so I believe that was really the foundation and the reason for why I cherish dinner time as a family together. And I'm just so thankful for that time that we have with my wife and our 3 kids together. And something that we fight for, that I fight for very hard, is, no electronics at the table, TV's off, and it's just us having conversations, talking together. And I love that. even with three littles, it can be challenging sometimes, especially with one that's younger than two. But I'm so thankful for them. I love our family. I'm so grateful for the family that God's given me. They are such a blessing, and I really, really cherish that time all together that we have. So, yeah, that's my story in a nutshell. And I hope that this is helpful for you. I'd love to hear your feedback on the solo episode. If you want to see or hear more episodes like this, maybe a little bit shorter, maybe more bite-sized nuggets that I've picked up and learned along the way from the life I've lived so far, for people that I've learned lessons from, or different practical tips. If you'd like to see more episodes like that, please let me know in the comments or send me an email, because I'd love to cater this podcast to more of what you are looking for. I've got a couple of episodes scheduled going forward with guests, so we'll go back to our traditional format as we collect feedback from you. And so if you want to connect with me, you can reach out to me at Instagram at Dustin A. Lail, or we just launched the Instagram for this podcast specifically on Instagram at the Elevation Room Podcast. You can find us on Facebook at the Elevation Room Podcast, and on YouTube at the Elevation Room Podcast. So if you like this, if you're enjoying the content that's coming from this, please feel free to support the channel as well, on YouTube or through our podcast support. Either way, every bit helps to continue with the production of this podcast, upgrading the equipment, and getting things done in a manner and a standard of excellence. So I appreciate it. I'm so thankful for you. Remember that the journey you're on, we're all on this together. And no matter what you are facing in all things, remember to stay rooted in your purpose, living on purpose, and continue to walk with purpose each and every day. And with that, I appreciate you joining me for this conversation on the Elevation Room. Until next time.